5 years ago, I walked out of a rainy Seattle courtroom with nothing. No house, no savings. Not even Max, the golden retriever I'd raised since he was a puppy. Claire, my ex-wife, stood there in her perfect dress, smiling like she'd won a trophy. And maybe she had. The judge's gavel had just handed her everything I'd spent 20 years building. I remember stepping into the cold November air, the rain soaking through my only decent suit. I had $37 in my wallet, and a divorce decree that made it clear I didn't matter anymore. I rented a cramped apartment in Tacoma, worked construction during the day, washed dishes at night. Every blister on my hands was a reminder of how far I'd fallen. But in the quiet hours when the world was asleep, I planned. Every nail I hammered, every bill I paid late, every sleepless night was fuel. I built something new, something bigger. 7 properties. A thriving renovation company, a view of Lake Union from my own balcony. And tonight she's back, standing on my porch, mascara streaked, voice trembling. "Daniel, we should talk. Stick around, because what happens next is the reason I tell these stories. And if you believe in justice served cold, you'll want to hear every word." 5 years ago, I stepped out of a rainy Seattle courtroom with nothing. Not a house, not a savings account, not even Max, the golden retriever I'd raised since he could fit in one hand. Claire, my ex-wife, stood there in her tailored dress, smiling like she'd just claimed a trophy. And maybe she had. The judge's gavel had handed her everything I'd spent 20 years building. Cold November air hit me like a slap rain soaking straight through my only decent suit. In my wallet, $37. In my hand, a divorce decree that might as well have said, "You no longer matter." I moved into a cramped Tacoma apartment that smelled of damp carpet and regret. Days on construction sites. Nights washing dishes. Every blister on my hands a reminder of just how far I'd fallen. But in those dead hours when the city was asleep and all I could hear was the hum of the fridge I planned. Every nail I hammered. Every late bill. Every night staring at the ceiling was fuel. I rebuilt 7 properties. A thriving renovation company. A balcony with a view of Lake Union bought with my own hands. And tonight, she's back. On my porch, mascara streaked, voice shaking. "Daniel, we should talk. Stay with me, because what happened next is why I tell these stories. And if you believe in justice served cold, you'll want to hear every word." Claire Reed was the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room. Not just for her looks, though she had those in spades, but for the way she carried herself. Confident, charming, like the world was something she could negotiate with a smile. We met at the University of Washington. I was the guy in worn jeans and work boots studying engineering. She was the marketing major with perfect hair and a laugh that could make professors forget what they were saying. From the start, I knew she liked nice things. The right dress, the newest phone, the vacations with ocean views. And I didn't mind, I wanted to give her those things. I thought that's what love was, building a life where the person you loved never had to want for anything. When we moved to Bellevue, she said it was the next step for us. Bigger house, closer to the city, more parties to attend. I figured it was progress. She called it networking. I called it building a future. But as the years passed, I noticed the gap. While I measured life in projects completed, she measured it in invitations and connections. The nights she came home late grew more frequent. The stories about clients got vaguer. And sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch that distant stare, the one that told me her mind was already somewhere else. Still, I held on. Because you don't walk away from the person you built your life around. I didn't know yet that she'd already found a way to walk away from me. Our life in Bellevue looked perfect from the outside. A two-story home with white trim and a neatly kept lawn. Morning started with the sound of Max's paws on the hardwood floor, followed by the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. I'd head out early, tool belt in hand, ready for another day overseeing job sites across Seattle. Claire's mornings were slower, a perfect outfit, a perfect latte, and a calendar full of meetings I rarely knew much about. We still had our moments. Friday nights on the deck watching the city lights reflect off Lake Washington. Sunday walks at Chisholm Beach Park. But looking back, those moments were just snapshots framed and hung to make the gallery look complete. There were cracks I didn't want to see. She started spending more weekends away for work. My calls would go unanswered for hours. The warmth in her voice faded, replaced by a polished tone like she was speaking to a stranger. Money became another silent divider. I was focused on paying off the mortgage early. She was focused on upgrading a bigger house, a faster car, a newer ring. I told myself it was just a phase, that every marriage goes through seasons. But deep down I felt the shift, like I was building a house with walls and a roof, while she was quietly selling the land underneath. And in the middle of it all, I kept working, kept believing, not realizing the storm was already on the horizon, and when it hit, it would take everything. The morning of the divorce hearing, Seattle was wrapped in cold November rain. I wore my best and only suit, the one I'd bought for our 10th anniversary dinner. The courthouse in downtown felt more like an execution chamber than a place for justice. Claire arrived early, heels clicking on the marble floor, her lawyer at her side, the kind of attorney you hire when you're not just looking to win, but to crush. We didn't speak before the session. She didn't look at me once. The judge read through the settlement terms as if my life was just a list of items to be redistributed. The house in Bellevue hers, the savings account hers, Max, our golden retriever, hers. When my attorney objected, she didn't even flinch. It's in the best interest of stability, her lawyer argued, as if stability had ever been her goal. By the time the gavel hit, it was over. 20 years together reduced to a few stamped pages. Claire smiled politely, shook her lawyer's hand, and walked out without a word. I stood there, holding a manila envelope that felt heavier than concrete. Outside, the rain came down harder. Seattle traffic hissed by as I walked to my truck, the cold soaking through my suit. I checked my wallet, $37, and nowhere to go. That was the day I learned something important. Losing everything doesn't happen in an instant. It happens in 100 little cuts, and the last one just draws enough blood for you to notice you're bleeding out. I didn't drive back to Bellevue that day. I couldn't. Instead, I headed south on I-5 until the skyline faded in my rearview mirror. By evening, I found a month-to-month rental in Tacoma, a one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke. The landlord didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. The first week was a blur of cold dinners and colder nights. My phone stayed mostly silent except for spam calls and the occasional wrong number. Max's empty collar sat on the counter like a monument to everything I'd lost. I picked up whatever work I could find. Construction cleanup during the day, sweeping sawdust, hauling scrap metal, scraping dried paint off floors. Dishwashing at a diner off 6th Avenue at night where the grease never seemed to wash out of my hands, no matter how hard I scrubbed. The pay barely covered rent, gas, and instant noodles. I learned to live with the constant hum of the fridge, the flicker of the overhead light that never got fixed, and the sound of footsteps from the apartment above, reminders that I was just another nameless tenant in a place built for people passing through. Every night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the trial in my head. The look on Claire's face, the way the judge never met my eyes. I thought rock bottom was losing the house, the savings, the dog. But I was wrong. Rock bottom was the moment you realize no one's coming to save you, and if you want to stand again, you'll have to build the ground yourself. The turning point didn't come with some grand epiphany. It came from a crumpled flyer taped to the window of a pawn shop. Foreclosed property auction, Queen Anne, Seattle. The pictures? Nisa showed a house most people wouldn't touch. Broken windows peeling paint. A porch that sagged like it was tired of standing. But I saw something else, a solid frame, a good roof line, and potential hidden under all that neglect. The starting bid was $42,000. It might as well have been $4 million with the money I had. But I'd saved every tip from the diner, every spare dollar from construction work. Added to the last of what was in my account, I scraped together just enough to bid. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty living room, sunlight spilling across the warped floorboards. It smelled of dust and abandonment, but to me, it smelled like possibility. I didn't hire a crew, couldn't afford one. Instead, I borrowed tools, watched YouTube tutorials, and worked 16-hour days learning plumbing by day, electrical wiring by night. My hands blistered, my back ached, but for the first time in months I felt forward motion. Every nail I drove, every wall I patched was more than just repair work. It was me, piece by piece, rebuilding what I'd lost. When the house finally sold 4 months later, I walked away with a profit of $120,000. Enough to pay off debts, upgrade my truck, and start thinking about what came next. For the first time since the divorce, I wasn't just surviving. I was building again. The day the Queen Anne house closed, I sat in my truck staring at the check. $120,000. My name on it. It wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that I could take something broken, something everyone else had written off, and make it worth something again. I drove straight to the bank, cashed it, and for the first time in years my account balance didn't feel like a countdown to zero. That night, I celebrated with a real steak dinner, no instant noodles, no paper plates. I ate alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt alive. The success lit a fire I hadn't felt since my early construction days. I started scouting other foreclosures in Seattle, walking through abandoned properties with a notepad and a vision. Capitol Hill, Ballard, Rainier Valley. Each neighborhood had hidden gems if you knew how to see past the rot and ruin. I upgraded my tools, bought a used work van, and kept my expenses lean. No flashy car, no fancy suits, every extra dollar went back into the business. And word started to spread. Contractors remembered my work ethic. Real estate agents noticed how fast my renovations sold. A few even started bringing me deals before they hit the market. By the end of that year, I'd flipped 3 more properties. The profit wasn't just paying the bills, it was building something bigger. For the first time since Claire had walked out of that courtroom, I wasn't defined by what I'd lost. I was defined by what I was building. Within 2 years, the man who once counted pennies for gas was now signing deals in glass-walled offices overlooking Puget Sound. My renovation business had grown into a full-scale development company. We weren't just flipping single homes anymore, we were restoring entire blocks. A decaying row of houses in Rainier Valley became modern townhomes. An abandoned warehouse in Soto turned into a thriving co-working space. Every project told the same story, take something everyone else had given up on and make it better than new. It became my signature, and clients were willing to pay a premium for it. The numbers didn't lie. My net worth climbed past 7 figures. My name started appearing in the Seattle Real Estate Journal. Invitations to industry galas and charity auctions flooded in, but I stayed careful. I remembered too well what it felt like to lose everything. Instead of chasing attention, I chased results. My office overlooked Lake Union, but I still drove the same used work van. My suits were off the rack, my watch simple. Every dollar I didn't need went back into projects. People started calling me the man who builds second chances. I liked that, because in a way I wasn't just rebuilding houses, I was rebuilding myself. Then one rainy Thursday evening, as I was reviewing blueprints for a new waterfront development, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen froze me mid-sip of coffee. Claire Reed. After 5 years of silence, she was calling. I let it ring twice before answering. "Claire," I said, my voice flat. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of rain against my office windows. Then her voice smooth-practiced with just the right amount of tremble. "Daniel, it's been a long time. 5 years to be exact. 5 years since she walked out of that courtroom without looking back. What do you need?" I asked. She exhaled sharply as if rehearsing this call had still left her unprepared. "I wouldn't be calling unless it was important. I've had some setbacks. The business isn't doing well, and..." She hesitated. "I need a place to stay, just for a while. The nerve after everything." "Bellevue not big enough for you anymore," I said, letting the edge slip into my voice. "It's complicated," she replied, her tone softening. "I thought maybe we could start fresh." Fresh, like the slate she'd wiped clean when she took everything. In the background, I caught a muffled voice. A man's. She must have covered the phone, but I still heard it. "Ask him about the money." My jaw tightened. "Who's that?" "Just a friend," she said quickly. "Please, Daniel, we could talk over dinner. My treat." I looked at the blueprint spread across my desk. Multi-million-dollar projects waiting for my attention. And here was the woman who'd left me with $37 asking for a lifeline. I told her I'd think about it. Hung up. Sat there in silence. If she thought this was a reunion, she was wrong. This was reconnaissance. I didn't call her back that night. Instead, I poured myself a glass of rye whiskey and sat in the dark, watching the Seattle skyline shimmer across Lake Union. Claire's voice still echoed in my head, soft, calculated, carrying that same tone she'd used when convincing the judge to take everything from me. But it wasn't her request that bothered me most. It was the man's voice in the background. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to shut her out, not yet. People like Claire show their true selves when they think they've won you back. I called her mid-morning. "Dinner at my place Saturday," I said. "Bring whoever you need to bring." She hesitated. "Your place?" "Yes, you'll see what I've built." I let that hang in the air. The rest of the week I worked like normal. Site visits, meetings with investors, late-night blueprint reviews. But in between, I made a few calls of my own. A private investigator I'd used on a business deal in Tacoma. A friend in the King County Legal Department. Quiet, careful inquiries. By Friday, the first pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The business troubles she mentioned weren't just bad luck, they were lawsuits waiting to happen. And that friend in the background, he had his own trail of debts and failed ventures. Saturday night would be more than dinner. It would be the first move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. The soft clink of silverware cut through the heavy quiet like a warning bell. Amber light spilled over the polished oak table, painting long shadows across Claire's perfectly composed face. Her smile, once able to undo me in a second, now felt too smooth, too calculated. "Daniel," she began, voice silk stretched over steel. "We've been thinking. With your resources, a small investment could help us through a rough patch." Ryan leaned in, straightening his tie, his gaze sweeping my home like an appraiser taking notes. 50,000, he added. "That clears the debts," and I set my fork down. Slow, deliberate debts. My tone was calm, but the edge was there. "Funny, that's not how you sold it last week." Claire's smile flickered the mask, slipping for just a breath. "We didn't want to worry you." I leaned back, folding my arms, letting the pause stretch until even the rain outside seemed to wait. Then I locked eyes with her, then with Ryan, holding them in place like specimens under glass. "Thing is," I said softly, "I like details," and I found all of them. From my jacket, I slid a thick envelope onto the table. It landed with a weight that wasn't just paper. 3 active fraud suits, Ryan's bankruptcy, a list of contractors you stiffed from Portland to Spokane. Every name, every dollar. Verified. Ryan's jaw locked. "You threatening us?" I tilted my head just enough for the corner of my mouth to lift. "No. I'm informing you. And every copy. All ready with your creditors, the plaintiffs, and a journalist who's been waiting for this story." Claire's hand hovered over the envelope, but she didn't open it. Her eyes flicked toward the window as if she might find an exit in the storm. I stood pulling on my jacket. My voice was low, final. "5 years ago, you took everything from me. Tonight, I'm just returning the favor with interest." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was the sound of their world caving in. I set my fork down and leaned back, letting the quiet fill the room. "You know, I began my voice, even I did some thinking after our last call, and a little digging." Ryan shifted in his seat. Claire's smile tightened. "Turns out," I continued, "your business troubles are more than unpaid invoices. 3 active lawsuits, all citing fraud. And Ryan, you've got a bankruptcy filing from 18 months ago, plus a trail of unpaid contractors from Portland to Spokane." Claire's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "Daniel, that's not..." I held up a hand. "Save it. I've got copies of every filing, every complaint. And I've already spoken to a few of the plaintiffs. Funny thing, they're very interested in pooling resources." Ryan's jaw clenched. "You're bluffing." I smiled. Not wide, just enough to let him see I wasn't. "I don't bluff with facts. Saturday dinner seemed like a nice setting to tell you that you won't see a dime from me, but you will see me again. In court." Claire's face paled, her gaze darting to the window as if there were an escape route there. "Daniel, we can work something out. No, Claire, you made your choices. Now you get the consequences." I stood sliding a thick envelope onto the table. "That's a copy of everything I have. Consider it a courtesy." The rain outside grew heavier, tapping the glass in steady rhythm as their silence filled the space between us. Claire reached for the envelope, her hands trembling. She flipped through the pages, court filings, complaint letters, photographs of properties they'd abandoned mid-project. Every sheet was a nail in the coffin. Ryan's voice dropped low, almost a growl. "You think you can ruin us?" I met his stare. "I don't think. I know. And I'm not the one who ruined you. You did that yourselves. I'm just making sure the right people see it." Claire's eyes glistened, but not from remorse. From panic. "Daniel, please. If this gets out, we'll lose everything." "You already lost me," I said, my tone flat. "The rest, that's just overdue payment." I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, sliding it on slowly. "I've already sent copies of this to your creditors, the plaintiffs, and a very persistent investigative journalist. By Monday morning, your phones will ring non-stop and not with opportunities." Ryan pushed back from the table, muttering something under his breath. Claire just sat there frozen, staring at the storm outside as if it might wash this all away. I stepped toward the door, pausing only once. 5 years ago, you took everything I had. Tonight, I'm just returning the favor with interest." The door shut behind me with a solid click, muffling the chaos inside. Outside, the rain was cold but clean, and for the first time in years, I felt the same way. The streets of Seattle shimmered under the streetlights, each puddle trembling with the steady rain. I walked to my truck without rushing, the cold air biting just enough to remind me I was alive and in control. 5 years ago, I'd walked out of a courthouse stripped of everything: my home, my savings, my dog, my future. Tonight, I walked away carrying something far greater proof that I could take back what was mine, not in possessions but in power. Revenge, I realized, isn't about rage. It isn't even about balance. It's about truth. And tonight, the truth was on my side, undeniable, documented, and already moving into the right hands. As I drove onto I-5, the skyline stretched ahead, the Space Needle piercing the low clouds. This city had seen me at my lowest, and now it was witnessing my highest. I thought about the people Claire and Ryan had cheated, the phone calls I'd made, the cases that would now have a fighting chance. Justice, once set in motion, has a way of gathering speed. By the time I reached home, the rain had softened to a mist. My office window reflected a man who no longer measured his worth by what was taken from him. I had rebuilt my life brick by brick, deal by deal, and tonight I'd set the last stone. Somewhere out there, Claire and Ryan were scrambling to stop a ship that had already sunk. I didn't need to see it to know. The sound of their silence at that dinner table was all the closure I'd ever need. 5 years ago, I left with nothing. Tonight, I left with everything that mattered. It made me think. Every story, like mine, starts the same, with someone losing more than they thought they could survive. And every ending, like tonight's, begins with a choice not to give in, but to fight back, smart, patient, and precise. If you've stayed with me this far, maybe you've lived your own version of betrayal. Maybe you've been underestimated, written off, or told you'd never recover. I'm here to tell you you can. Because revenge, when done right, isn't about chaos. It's about control. It's not shouting in anger, it's standing in silence, knowing you've already won. It's handing the truth to the right people and watching the consequences do the rest. Somewhere out there, another Claire, another Ryan is walking into someone else's life. And somewhere, there's another person who needs to hear that losing is not the end, it's the start of the rebuild. That's why I tell these stories. Not for drama, not for pity, but because truth deserves a voice. And if you believe in justice served cold in endings where the right side finally wins, then you're exactly where you need to be. So stick around, subscribe, turn on notifications. Not for me, but so you'll be here when the next story unfolds, and the next reckoning begins. Justice deserves to be told, and I'll be here to tell it.